What's going on, my babies? Welcome back to another episode of The Spiritual Word. As always, I apologize for any noises in the background in advance and anything of that nature. And I also like to start these off with a disclaimer by stating that these are for entertainment purposes only. Always do your own research to come to your own conclusions, to make your own decisions, to have your own answers. And I believe in your ability to do so and to be your own person. So, in today's episode, I am simply just going to be talking about some of the things that I've noticed in myself recently that might I just feel like there's a lot of things that I've been going through that's really relatable in the sense of like spiritual community and stuff like that. Also, I'm wearing this really annoying shirt, and every time that I move my head, my headset's cord rubs against it. It sounds really awful, and I apologize for that. But basically, so the things I've been going through related to the spiritual um, community has been a lot to do with like trying to maintain keeping my peace and trying to maintain not having reactions to people. And then a part of me yesterday realized that that's just who I am. Like, I'm really dramatic, and that's just who I am by nature. Like, that's just the way I was made. And I say I'm really dramatic because of other people's opinions of me. And yesterday I was having all these realizations where I'm like, you know what, everybody's just being them unapologetically. And so why am I punished for being myself unapologetically? And I realized that the only person that's trying to change me is me. And the reason for me trying to change is to appease other people. And why am I doing that? And I always refer back to like, oh, well, Jesus was, this really perfect person, and, he would never harm anything. And I go back to Buddhist philosophy where if you hurt even a bug, that's years of bad karma, or that's years of going to the hell realm. And a part of me is like, are those things there to scare us into acting correctly, or is that truth? And obviously, I'm not dead. Obviously, I'm not Jesus. Obviously, I'm not a Buddha. And for that reason, I don't have the question or the answer to those questions. And then I got to this point in my little rambling session of the night where I was like, you know what? It doesn't really matter whether or not those are true, whether or not those are there for a punishment, whether or not those are there for us to keep keep ourselves in check and keep ourselves in line. But regardless of that being true or not, the only thing I can really focus on is here and now, and making here and now a decent picture for myself. And I don't think that I'd be really proud of myself for appeasing everybody, just because to me, I'm like, that's why am I working so hard for everybody else? But at the same time, I think I would be proud of myself just for the fact that, like, I'm doing something good, and nobody's gonna sit here and calculate whether or not it's really that good. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm doing really good things for my community, aka my immediate community, aka my family, then that's better than not doing anything at all. Even if it's not written down in a book, you know what I mean? Like, even if it's not documented, even if it's just a random occurrence, and even if it's, I don't know, I guess not written in the stars, and if everything is just empty and, God isn't real and all these crazy things are not real. So, yesterday came to this point in my reality where I'm like, fuck it, who cares? And a part of me is like, that is bliss. The bliss is ignorance. The bliss is saying, oh, well, fuck it. If it happens, it happens. And I think that the struggling that I put myself through, in a way, I represent it as a form of hell. And the reason that I think I deserve to be in hell is because I'm not worthy of just existing, even if another person who's way shittier than me, like Hitler, was worthy of existing. You know what I mean? So I think it's a part of the people pleasing in me that wants to make everything right, make everything perfect all the time. And that's just not the case. Like, I can't do that all the time. And even if I try to do that once, it's not gonna go as planned. At least not every single time, just because life is not meant to be this perfect, uniform, straight line. And then that made me think of, like, okay, what about, like, the power of manifestation, the power of positivity, and all these other things. And I think that just that kind of spiraled me, just because I'm like, oh, what the fuck, like, I'm over here trying to maintain my positivity, maintain my peace, and you're telling me it's all for nothing. I think my brain just has a way of, like, arguing with itself. And so that's what I was experiencing last night. And I think I was just arguing really heavily with myself last night, and I think that's what imbalances me. And once I get onto, like, a regular set page for myself, and I'm like, this is how I think it is, I'm gonna go with this, just like everybody does. Like, that's what everybody's beliefs are. If you talk to somebody and they're like, I was listening to my parents this morning talking about how my mom was gonna go on a trip with one of my cousins, but it was gonna be $3,000 for everything. And then my dad sat there and he was like, "Are you sure? Are you sure that's really expensive? I don't think it should be that much." And he just kept going like, "Are you sure? Are you sure? I don't think you're right. I don't think you're right. I don't think you're right." And obviously he wasn't directly saying, "I don't think you're right about that," but he would go around the point that he was trying to make by saying, "I really don't think that you guys have it correct. It should not be that much." Like, he wasn't directly saying, "You are not right," but that's what he was saying. "You are not right. I'm right. Listen to what I'm saying." And then my mom would do the same thing. And I feel like that's what we're all doing. Like, I'm right, listen to me. That person's right, listen to them. And yesterday, when I was watching my brain have that argument with itself, I was really sitting here and thinking about, like, the grand scheme of humanity. Like, that's what we all do. And that's what I've been experiencing. That's why I say it's, like, relatable, because most people who struggle with their thoughts are struggling because they're having an argument with themselves. And the argument that you're having with yourself is really not that deep. You just have to choose whichever side you think is going to be more beneficial to you. And nobody can argue with that, because you decide that, because that's what free will is. And I think that free will in its own is not expressed as free will just because your brain argues with itself. So if I sit here and I tell you, oh, God is real, and you're like, no, it's not, then you're gonna have that argument to be like, okay, well, if God is real, then why do people get, caught up in wars that aren't even their fault? Why does the pharmaceutical industry not care about helping our well-being, but instead making a profit? And I would have the argument to say that humans have their free will. God is not in charge here. God has its rulings, and God has a set of rules, but it's a set of rules that applies to all of us, not just one of us. And have you ever noticed that when you're in school and one person's talking in the class and you all get punished and everybody has to be quiet and everybody has to shut up and sit down and listen to the rules because of one person's mistake? It's the same thing, and I could argue that point back to this person who's saying, oh, well, if God's real, then why does disease, famine, war, and suffering happen? I'm like, that's just a part of this experience. That's just here. And it's a necessary part, because if there was no pain, there would be no pleasure, and everything would just feel the same as it did before you came into a body. Everything would just be emptiness. Good needs bad, bad needs good, yin and yang, right and wrong, left and right, up and down, as above so below. It's needed to be there. And you could argue with me and we could just keep going back and forth. But I think I thought it was very interesting, the fact that I was able able to observe that in myself. And I think I do my best meditation when I'm fantasizing, because it allows me to go into the fantasy and to see why I chose what I chose in said fantasies. Like, I was having this, movement of my thoughts, like, really heavily last night. And I was just letting it go and just watching where it went. And every time that I'd go into like a really deep hole that I've dug for myself, I'd sit there and be like, okay, I don't need to go any further than this. And I usually stop as soon as something negative would pop up. And it would take a little bit of digging, but negativity would arise from me digging these holes. And it was always just from negative experiences. And I feel like that's also just because of your brain's trying to keep you alive, so it's going to show you things that you want to stay away from. And I think that I try to stay away from negativity, which is not a bad thing, but it's also not extremely useful, just because I feel like negativity has some things to it. Like, if it wasn't here, positivity wouldn't be a thing. So I feel like there's something there that I'm not seeing. And I think that most people struggle to stop themselves before they get down a negative hole in their own mind. Like, I think people who struggle with depression or anxiety, their battles or their thoughts or their thinking, they don't observe their thinking. They're just in it and fluid in it. And when you're in it, you're just digging yourself into this hole of like, oh, okay, this means this means that, this means that, this means that, this means that. Because that's what we do as human beings. We're just trying to make everything make sense. And at a certain point, you can't really do that. And I think once you get to a point where like you can't really explain why things happen, you start thinking about certain other things that, have no meaning, and that might feel very negative. And then once you start getting into this negative hole, if you're not like registering that that thing is negative, you're just going to keep digging and digging and digging and digging. And unless you are aware of this said pattern, in order for you to stop this said pattern. And most people are not aware of their patterns, so they don't stop them. And I think that's what could really be of benefit to people who have depression or anxiety and all these other things. Like, the reason that people go to therapy is to learn how to do exactly what the fuck I'm talking about. And I find that idea extremely trippy, because I'm just trying to make this make sense. And two, just I find it extremely disappointing in society, because therapists are obviously not there to fix your problems, but they can show you what the problem is, and they don't, because they want you to get to it and blah blah blah. But it's kind of like that's the reason that you go to therapy in the first place. You go so that it's the mind doctor, or at least to normal people, that's the mind doctor, especially if you're not meditating, if you're not doing things that regulate your mental health. And I think that that's really dumb that it's not something that's employed. And I also find it disappointing, just because I find it a little bit sad that instead of caring about our well-being and the well-being of our community and the growth of our community, we're more worried about, let me get to this thing first before that person, so I have that resource, or let me get more money. And money is really a huge thing for me, just because I wouldn't say that money is the root of all evil, because obviously money doesn't make everybody evil, but money is how the evil rules. And obviously the evil would rule either way, so I don't really blame money, but it does kind of bother me that money is used in this. And that, I have a lot of conspiracy theories. I don't like that the dollar says, "In God we trust." So, with that ramble, I hope that that made sense. And if it didn't, let me just clarify, and then I'm gonna end this, just because I feel like I'm doing it again. So, when you have depression or anxiety, when you have these things, then for me, it feels like your thoughts are just running around like rampant toddlers, and you don't know how to contain those toddlers because you've never been a parent. And it takes being a parent and learning and allowing those toddlers to do things and for you to mess up and for things to happen before you can really have that under control, or that situation or that circumstance under control. And because people don't teach parents how to be a parent, which I feel like would be useful, then you get caught up in these cycles of like, I don't know what I'm doing, because it's really hard to just figure things out for yourself. And I'm on the slow side. I consider myself on the slow side, so if you're really on that slow side with me, then it takes you a lot longer than somebody who has the money, who has the resources, somebody who has the tools or the knowledge, because that's something that I feel like if you have this knowledge, then you had to find that somewhere or somebody had to give it to you. But I feel like knowledge is something extremely valuable that in my community is extremely scarce. And obviously life teaches you and blah blah blah, but if you're somebody who just kind of like fucks up and doesn't know what to do and has the same fucks happen again, sorry, then it's hard, and life is hard. And especially if you have a problem with victimizing yourself or depression, anxiety, blah blah blah, you don't know how to parent those thoughts. Those toddlers are just running around and you don't know how to parent them. And the only way that I've ever experienced learning how to parent these thoughts is to actually let them run around. Like, don't try to fight them, because the more you try to fight them, the more it stresses you out. Just like if your mom is trying to get you to, or you're trying to get your kids to eat vegetables and they throw a tantrum and they scream and cry and throw shit across the room, just let them. You can't do anything about that, and if you try to prevent that from happening and then it does happen, you're going to feel worse than if you just let it happen. And on top of that, you're going to feel more stressed out because you were trying to prevent it from happening. So, all in all, it's going to make you feel worse, especially if you don't achieve what you're trying to achieve. Yes, there's some people who can control their toddlers like that, but that's not everybody. And if it is you, then, that's awesome. But if it's not you, then, what are you going to do? And I myself am not one of those people who's like, I can manage kids with ease. I just can't. And so for that reason, it's taking me a little bit more time to really get the idea of these toddlers that exist in my mind. They're not bad by nature. They're not a bad thing. The thoughts that you have, they're not bad by nature. It's just about how you're allowing these things to dominate you. If you're a mom and you let your kids run your life, then that is your identity. You become a mom, and that's it. You don't have your own life. You don't have your own dreams, goals, ambitions, and sometimes that's what happens in life, especially if you get overwhelmed with things. And I get overwhelmed with things. I know other people get overwhelmed with things, and you just kind of have to let the feeling of being overwhelmed, and you have to let it come in and dissipate like waves. You have to kind of ride the waves, and obviously that's going to be hard, but the better you get at riding these waves, the more you become a pro at surfing, and you get something out of it in return, regardless of whether you think that you don't get shit out of this or not. And that's the clash that I was having with myself yesterday. I was sitting with myself and I'm like, I've been trying to change myself for all these other people and not for myself. I've been trying to please my parents. I've been trying to look good for this society. I've been trying to make money so that I look like I know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm trying to get my name in research papers so that people will take my name seriously. But I take my name seriously. So let these thoughts run around, but don't let them dominate who you are and who you're being, especially if it comes down to like when I was a kid, I was backstabbed and backstabbed and backstabbed, and people didn't like me, and people used to just talk mad shit about me, and my parents used to beat me when I got home and blah blah blah, and I was neglected and I was blah blah blah. Like if you have all these traumas, take care of that toddler that exists in you. When people say that, take care of your inner child, do what your inner child would want you to do. Be that person that you'd be safe around if you were a kid. And I think I'm just gonna end this here just because I feel like that is rambled and it's everywhere. But basically, just take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, and shit will go a lot smoother. And take care about how you feel specifically. And with that being said, thanks for tuning in and tapping in. I upload Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. If spirituality, psychology, science, self-help, philosophy is something that you're interested in, I recommend subbing or following. And I hope that this was entertaining in any way, shape, and form. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.